Hi everyone, happy Monday, welcome to my room. Before I start this video, I want to remind you that there is this beautiful book that I have written on the INFJ type. More than hundreds among you have already purchased it, and the echoes and reactions so far have been very positive. It's less than $10. All links are in the description box for all the countries. If you are interested in discovering the INFJ like you've never discovered the type before, and the INFJ type from the inside rather than from the outside, the most in-depth study of the INFJ ever conducted, the Ecstatic Soul. Links down below. Thank you guys. And I think that if I place it like this, it should remain in view. Great. So, what are we going to talk about today? I would like to talk about something that could be of practical use to my audience, particularly INFJs in my audience, although I do suspect that, to be honest, the advice could be of use to INFPs as well, and all sorts of introverted types that are also feeling types. I mean, it could also be of use to thinking types that tend to be on the sensitive side, or to extroverts, who are also on the sensitive side. But I'll focus my video on INFJs with the knowledge that, the advice could expand to other types. So, how to deal with arguments, how to deal with verbal confrontations in which the purpose is to convince the other person of a particular view, or at least get closer to the truth in relation to a particular matter. How to deal with this, how to cope with this from the perspective of being an INFJ who's by definition quite a sensitive type, conflict avoidant, doesn't really like coming to fisticuffs with other people, and who can easily get upset if they feel like they are the recipient of significant criticism. So before I move to the 5 elements that I think are key to managing a constructive kind of exchange, conversation, debate, or argument, whatever you want to call it, let's just briefly think of why it's useful to actually have debates and conversations with people who may not be in agreement with us about a particular topic. Why is it beneficial? Obviously, it's not beneficial if the other person only has destructive intent, but let's assume that most of the time people don't have destructive intent, they mostly have different opinions. I think that being able to get into the ring, Ludwig Wittgenstein, the philosopher, once said that a philosopher who doesn't debate his ideas, is like a boxer who doesn't get into the ring. The idea is that it can obviously help you refine your views, because other people do have usually interesting things to bring. You have ideas, they might probably be worthy of, being honed, being refined, and getting another perspective, a perspective that may not agree with you completely, will enlighten you, the path that you've been following so far. And that's not necessarily threatening you. Now, if you're willing to enter this ring, so to speak, so first of all, you're going to come out with a better sense of what your ideas are and the precision of your ideas, but also you're going to increase over time in self-confidence, because you'll have this self-perception as someone who is ready to go into the ring and confront your opinions and thoughts and beliefs and convictions with those of other people, no matter who they are. This will increase your assertiveness, and INFJs often have an issue with assertiveness. A healthy dose of assertiveness does not equate to aggressiveness. It's good to have a minimal amount of assertiveness in you, for your self-confidence, for your self-worth, and for functioning in society. And debates and conversations and arguments where different opinions are expressed are a really useful way to develop this assertiveness. So here are my 5 steps to coping with such situations when you're an INFJ type. So the first element, and I would say in some ways it's the most important element, even though it's a difficult step, is don't take things too personally. Don't take criticisms in particular too personally. And that's hard because an introverted intuitive is going to feel things very sharply. If on top of that they're a feeler, they're going to respond with a quite intense and strong affect. That doesn't mean necessarily that this ought to disarm you, that this ought to make you either give in and, just tell the other person you don't want to debate anymore or avoid them. It should be possible for you to displace the locus of the criticism from you and yourself, which is a typical move of the introvert, because the introvert tends to bring everything back to themselves, their sense of self. Extroverts don't function like that. They see and relate to things as external objects. So they're less likely to take things personally, although they certainly can in certain circumstances. But it's a very healthy move to always remember that you are not your opinions, you are not even your convictions, you are not your beliefs. The philosopher Bertrand Russell once said, "I would never die for my beliefs because I might be wrong." Now, he was an NTP, but notice, even if you don't completely agree with the quote, there's a wisdom to it. That your beliefs do not define you. It's always possible to change your beliefs. If it is possible for you to change your beliefs and your ideas, there's no sense in taking criticisms of your ideas and beliefs personally, because they do not define you personally. If they did, you could not change them, but you can. So even as a bit of practical advice, whenever you're facing a situation like this, always think, what is being criticized is not me. And usually the other person is literally not criticizing you. If they criticize your ideas, they might still think you're very smart. They might not say it, but they might very well think that and still be critical, because your ideas may be worthy of critique even if there's something really good about them. So always think you are not synonymous with your ideas. That's the first element. Second element is, number 2, trust your intuition. There's always a risk with introverted intuitives in particular, and especially with INFJs who through FE are influenced by other people, to think that their intuitions are too abstract and too difficult to express, and therefore to side with beliefs that are external to them. They kind of like those beliefs, those ideas. They're not theirs, but they because they're not theirs in a sense, they're already clarified, they're already clear, and they might think, well, this other person or this movement thinks this, and I kind of identify with this, and it's easier if I just adopt these, because they're already out there, they're already clear, I can clearly express them, whereas my intuitions are more muddled, more difficult. It doesn't really matter, because what's most interesting in a debate is when you bring your own perspective. So do not abandon the power and fruits of your intuition in favor of those external ideas, which are maybe appealing to you, but are not really yours. You're always in a stronger position when you express something that clearly comes from your subjectivity, okay? And your intuition is always going to take its time, but there's nothing wrong with just listening. Listen to the other person argue. Maybe they like talking, and you can just sit back and let your intuition do the work and put all the different cogs together, okay? So that ties in with the third step, which is to carefully listen to other people, to not interrupt them, and to try to seek to find inconsistencies, partly because that gives you something to say in return, but also it brings you and your counterpart closer to a stage of finding a common ground, because you're not finding inconsistencies in them so that you can prove them wrong or vanquish them, because as we will see in the step 4, this is a state of mind that you want to avoid if you're to be able to cope with a debate or a conversation that has a critical element. You want to get to a stage where you and your counterpart can essentially manage to find an overlapping domain of agreement where you can both say, okay, prior to the conversation, I had not quite gotten there. So thanks to this conversation, I've got there, and your counterpart will think the same. That involves finding inconsistencies in what you're saying, and your counterpart will help you, and in what your counterpart is saying, you can help them. So use your TI to try to seek to find these inconsistencies. And often you'll find that this in turn provides inputs to your NI to help you clarify your vision as it slowly unfolds across the conversation. Now, connected to this, step 4 is to always think about the process of argument and debate as a collaborative enterprise. One way of noticing and clearly identifying that someone is not worth debating with, that they have destructive intent, as I called it, is when you clearly notice and intuit straight away that there's no way of turning the debate or conversation into a collaborative enterprise, a positive sum game. If there's no way out of the debate being a zero-sum game when there's a winner and there's a loser, just avoid those at all costs. Just take a moment, don't jump straight into it, even if you're provoked. Take a step back and think about it for a second. Does this hold any hope of being a positive sum game, or is it bound to be a zero-sum game? If it's bound to be a zero-sum game, get the hell out of it. You will gain absolutely nothing from it, even if you win, because you don't care. INFJs don't really care about winning. They might think they care in the moment, but if they win at the cost of learning nothing new, ultimately it will be existentially unsatisfying to them. So just don't bother with it. Ignore these people. If, on the other hand, you are able to conceive of the exchange as a positive sum game, engage with the other person and use FE and TI together and NI to see how the other person is also evolving through the conversation, to keep this collaborative spirit very much alive. And this is actually a peculiar strength of the INFJ and explains part of why they can be charismatic, is this ability to guide the conversation as something that is not just an exchange, but a collaboration toward getting together to overlapping higher truths. And finally, what I would say, a bit of practical advice, and it's linked to really the first step, which is to not take too personally, is be willing to change your mind. Be willing to change your mind on the basis of other people's arguments. You know, it's not you who's called into question. It's never you who's actually called into question in an argument. It's the opinions you hold, and these opinions may or may not be right. So be willing to accept that some of your views are going to be right and defend them. Some of your views are going to be wrong, and if the spirit of the conversation is collaborative in the first place, you have every reason to admit to being wrong and to be willing to update as you progress, because at the end of the day, in a debate of this kind, the goal is always to secure an overlapping region of being closer to the truth, both for yourself and the other person. Thank you guys, take care.